Two neighbors, an undeniable connection, and a playful invitation that sparks a journey neither expected. Will the past hold them back, or will love find a way? The first time I saw her, it wasn't planned. It wasn't some grand meeting with perfect timing. It was just one of those quiet moments when the universe decides to nudge you in the right direction, and I couldn't help but feel drawn to her in ways I didn't fully understand at that time. I had just finished a long day at work and was heading back to my apartment. The hallway smelled faintly of freshly brewed coffee from the cafe downstairs, and the soft hum of the building's old air conditioning unit made the silence feel oddly comforting. My mind was focused on the mundane, what to have for dinner, the book I'd been meaning to finish, how my weekend was shaping up. But then I stepped out of my apartment, and she appeared, almost like a sudden shift in the atmosphere. She wasn't expecting me to be there. Her back was turned as she fumbled with the keys to her door, clearly adjusting to the idea of living in a new place. I noticed the way her hands moved gracefully, with purpose yet unhurried, her fingers lingering for a second too long on the door handle, almost like she was gathering her thoughts before stepping into the new life she was starting. The soft click of the door opening echoed slightly, but it wasn't what made my heart skip. It was the sound of her voice. When she turned and saw me, I could tell it wasn't the first time she'd noticed me. There was a soft recognition in her eyes, but not the kind that was loud or intrusive. It was more like a knowing glance that lingered just a moment longer than was typical between neighbors. It wasn't a look of curiosity or surprise, but one of quiet understanding. A mutual acknowledgement that we both knew the same things about each other, even if unspoken. She smiled, not a big, welcoming grin, but a small, subtle smile that seemed to say, "I see you." It was the kind of smile that could easily be overlooked, but something about it struck me, made me feel like I was the only person she could see in that brief second. There was warmth in it, but also something guarded, like a piece of her was still tucked away, just out of reach. I felt my breath catch in my chest, the simplest exchange of glances creating an unexpected weight between us. Her smile widened slightly as she tilted her head, her eyes briefly flickering to the ground before meeting mine again. It was fleeting but powerful, a moment suspended in time, and before I could muster the courage to say something, anything, she stepped inside her apartment, closing the door behind her with a soft, final click. I stood there for a second, unsure if what I just experienced was real or if my imagination had simply played tricks on me. There was nothing overtly flirtatious about the moment. No exchange of words or even a lingering look. It was as if the universe had simply aligned two souls for the briefest of interactions, and then just as quickly, it was over. But the feeling lingered. It was strange, almost like I was left with an echo of her presence in the hall, a scent of lavender and vanilla from her perfume, a trace of the warmth she radiated. As I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Something had started between us, even if neither of us had said a word. The hallway felt quieter than before, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself anticipating what would come next. The days following our brief encounter in the hallway felt different. Every time I passed by her door, I found myself pausing for just a split second, as if I were waiting for another sign, another glance, some indication that this unspoken connection was something more than a passing moment. She was there, just across the hall, and somehow, I couldn't help but be drawn to her. The curiosity I felt wasn't intrusive, but rather, it was an undercurrent of excitement that seemed to linger in the back of my mind, constantly pulling me toward her. It wasn't long before the opportunity to talk again presented itself, and it came in the most casual way imaginable. One evening, I was coming back from a late run to the grocery store. I had a bag of takeout Chinese food in one hand and my keys in the other. I was tired, hungry, and ready to just call it a night, but then I heard the sound of laughter drifting from the apartment across the hall. It was soft at first, and I wasn't sure if it was coming from her or just the background noise of the building settling. But as I reached for my door, the sound grew louder, unmistakable, genuine laughter. I froze for a moment, unsure of whether I should just ignore it and go inside or if I should take a step forward. I knocked on the door, tentatively at first. It was just a simple gesture, but I couldn't help but feel the weight of that small action. A few seconds passed before the door creaked open, and there she stood, just as I remembered her, confident, but with a hint of vulnerability in her eyes, as though she had just been caught in a private moment. She smiled at me, and this time it wasn't as guarded. It was a full smile, genuine and open. "Hey, I was just having some coffee. You want to join?" she asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I could have said no. I could have easily made an excuse, said I was tired or had plans. But something inside me urged me to say yes. There was something in the way she looked at me, something that made me feel like I was meant to be there in that moment, with her. We sat down at her kitchen table, and the conversation flowed as naturally as the laughter I'd heard earlier. It wasn't forced or awkward, there was no hesitation. It was easy, too easy. She shared stories about moving into the building, about life before the divorce, and about the simple pleasures she'd rediscovered in the quiet moments of her life. I listened intently, finding myself hanging on every word. Her voice was soothing, and there was a subtle warmth in her mannerisms that made me feel at home, even though I was still getting to know her. The more we talked, the more I realized how comfortable it felt to be around her. There was no pretense, no facade. She didn't try to impress me with elaborate stories or exaggerated tales. Instead, she was honest, sometimes blunt, but always in a way that was refreshing. I admired her ability to laugh at herself and the world around her, a quality I hadn't often seen in people who'd been through as much as she had. As we continued chatting, I couldn't help but notice the way she moved, the way her hand would occasionally reach up to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, or the way she would smile softly to herself when she recalled a happy memory. Every small gesture felt significant, like she was unknowingly pulling me deeper into her world. At some point, our conversation shifted, and we both found ourselves laughing over some ridiculous story I shared about an embarrassing moment at work. The sound of her laughter, light and melodic, filled the space between us, and for a moment, it felt as if the weight of the world had lifted. There was no tension, no uncertainty. Just two people enjoying each other's company, letting the moment exist without overthinking it. But underneath the easy banter, there was something else. A quiet, unspoken pull that neither of us acknowledged but that neither of us could ignore. We were both aware of it, this invisible thread that seemed to bind us together, even in the simplest moments. And as we sat there, laughing over something silly, I couldn't help but wonder, was this just a fleeting connection, or was it something more? Something that, like the laughter that filled the room, would continue to echo in both our hearts long after the conversation had ended? There comes a moment in every connection where the surface-level banter and playful exchanges give way to something deeper. I hadn't expected it that night, but there it was, a moment where vulnerability crept in, both unexpected and raw. We'd been sitting on her couch for hours, exchanging stories about our lives. The conversation had shifted from light-hearted tales of our childhoods to more serious reflections on the past. It was a natural progression, one that neither of us had planned for, but somehow it felt like we were both ready for it. We were two strangers in many ways, yet the words that flowed between us felt like a familiar melody, one we hadn't known we shared until that very moment. She was the one who brought it up first. Her fingers lightly traced the rim of her coffee cup, her gaze distant as she spoke. "I never really thought I'd end up here," she confessed softly, her voice quieter now. "You know, living alone after everything, the divorce, the empty spaces." There was a tremor in her voice, not one of weakness, but of something deeper, a long-buried pain that hadn't yet fully healed. I was quiet for a moment, taking in her words. There was no rush to fill the silence, it was as if the weight of the room demanded we both sit with the truth for a second. When I finally spoke, it was with a sincerity I hadn't known I was capable of. "I think sometimes," I began slowly, "that we only really know ourselves once we're alone, but it's harder than anyone tells you." She nodded, her lips curling slightly in an almost imperceptible smile. "Yeah," she whispered. "I didn't know who I was anymore after everything. It's like I lost myself in someone else, and now I have to find her again." I felt an unexpected surge of empathy. Her words resonated deep within me. Maybe not in the same way, but in the most profound, human way. I could feel the walls she'd built up, even as she opened up, a hesitation in her eyes, an uncertainty in her posture. But despite that, there was strength in her vulnerability, a quiet bravery in letting me see her at her most unguarded. I couldn't help but admire her for it. She wasn't afraid to show her scars, even if they were still fresh. "You'll find her," I said, my voice steady, hoping my words carried the weight of truth. "You already have, in a way. You're still here, still going." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the distance between us felt smaller. It wasn't a grand revelation, but it was a real one. I wasn't just looking at her anymore, I was seeing her. All the layers of strength, pain, and hope she carried, wrapped in a quiet confidence that had yet to fully bloom. And in that moment, I realized that whatever path we were both on, it was one I wanted to walk beside her, even if it was only in the smallest of steps. The tension between us had been building for weeks now, a quiet, almost electric hum whenever we crossed paths. There was an undeniable attraction, one that neither of us had fully acknowledged, but it was always there, hovering just beneath the surface of our interactions. I'd catch her glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking, and she'd sometimes smile at me with a knowing, almost mischievous glint in her eyes. It wasn't bold or overt, but it was unmistakable. And I felt it, too. One evening, as I stepped out of my apartment to grab a quick dinner, I found her standing by her door, her keys in hand, looking slightly distracted. She was wearing a soft sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back loosely, and even in that simple, casual moment, she looked effortlessly beautiful. My heart gave a little jolt at the sight of her, and for a moment, I thought I might chicken out and just retreat to my apartment to avoid whatever this pull was between us. But before I could make my decision, she noticed me. Her gaze locked with mine, and I felt a spark of something, the air around us charged with the promise of something more. She gave me a small, teasing smile, her lips curling upward as she leaned casually against the doorframe, her expression playful yet warm. "Don't be shy," she said, her voice low and soft but carrying just the right amount of teasing. "I won't bite, unless you want me to." The words hit me like a slow-motion wave, and for a second, I wasn't sure how to respond. My heart raced, my pulse quickening at her boldness, at the way she said it with such ease, as if she knew exactly how it would make me feel. There was no malice in her tone, no pressure. It was an invitation, a playful challenge, and it left me feeling both excited and unsure. What was she really saying? Was it just flirtation? Or was there something more? I stood there, momentarily frozen, unsure of whether to laugh it off or admit how much her words had affected me. But as I processed what she'd said, I realized she wasn't just teasing. She was testing the waters, seeing how far I was willing to go in this unspoken dance between us. I gave her a nervous chuckle, trying to keep the situation light, but I couldn't ignore the way my stomach fluttered, the way her words lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Well, that depends," I said, my voice coming out a little more nervous than I intended. "How much danger am I in?" Her eyes sparkled with amusement, and for a moment, it felt like the world around us faded. It was just her and me, standing in the hallway of our building, sharing something that wasn't yet fully defined, but was impossible to ignore. The space between us felt charged, as if a simple step could change everything. She didn't say anything more, but her smile lingered, and she pushed open her door just slightly wider, as if inviting me to step into her world, but only if I was ready. And as I turned to head back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that things between us had shifted. The line had been crossed, and though we hadn't fully acknowledged it yet, neither of us could pretend it wasn't there anymore. What had started as playful teasing was now a subtle promise, and I realized then that the next step was inevitable. The days that followed that teasing exchange felt heavier, as though the weight of unspoken words hung in the air between us. Every time I saw her, whether in the hallway or at the mailbox, there was a new layer to our interactions. The chemistry between us was undeniable, but there was a quiet tension too, a hesitation, a question we both kept dancing around but never quite addressed. I found myself thinking about her more often than I cared to admit. The way her laugh echoed in my mind, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about the simplest things. The more I tried to push the thoughts away, the more they lingered, occupying my every spare moment. But as much as I was drawn to her, I also felt a tinge of fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And, if I was being honest with myself, fear of what it meant to fall for someone like her, someone who had already been through so much, someone who seemed to carry a quiet sadness beneath the surface that she barely let show. But that night, it all came to a head. We were sitting together again, like so many other evenings. Her apartment was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp, the night stretching out before us. We had fallen into the familiar rhythm of our conversations, but tonight, something felt different. There was a weight to the silence, an unspoken understanding that we could no longer ignore what was simmering between us. The air felt thicker, charged with the energy of everything we hadn't said. She was sitting across from me, her legs tucked underneath her, sipping her wine slowly, her gaze turned downward as though she was deep in thought. I watched her, captivated by the small details, the way her fingers gently caressed the stem of the glass, the way her lips parted slightly as she exhaled in thought. "I've been thinking about something," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. My voice was steady, though my heart was racing. "About us." Her eyes flickered up to meet mine, a flash of vulnerability in them before she masked it with a smile. "Us," she repeated softly, as if testing the word on her tongue. "Yeah," I said, leaning forward, my elbows on my knees, the words suddenly pouring out before I could stop them. "I think about you all the time. And I can't figure out if it's just me or if you feel the same way." I ran a hand through my hair, suddenly nervous. "I don't want to make things awkward between us. I don't want to assume, but I can't keep pretending that I don't feel something when I'm with you." There it was, the confession. Raw. Unfiltered. It hung in the air between us like a breath held too long, waiting for the release. She was silent for a beat, her gaze dropping to her hands as she placed the wine glass gently down on the table. The room was so quiet that I could hear the soft flutter of her breath, the subtle shift in the weight of the moment. And then, just as I began to feel the sting of regret, she looked up, meeting my eyes with a softness I hadn't seen before. "I feel it too," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I didn't want to admit it either, but I can't ignore it anymore. I felt a rush of relief, followed by a wave of emotion I hadn't expected. There was a sense of clarity in her words, a weight lifting from my chest. I could see the truth in her eyes, the same uncertainty and longing I had been carrying in my own. It wasn't just me. But as the words sank in, I could feel the hesitation between us. She wasn't ready to jump into something just yet, and neither was I. Her life, my life, our histories, they were complicated, and we both knew that. But in that moment, there was no need for grand gestures or declarations. What mattered was that we had finally acknowledged it. We had finally said it out loud. "I don't know what this means, or where it goes," she continued, her voice steady now. "But I'm willing to see where it takes us." And just like that, everything shifted. There was no longer any doubt. The walls had come down, even if just a little. What we had was real, and we were both finally ready to explore it, whatever it might become. It's funny how life has a way of guiding you, leading you to moments that change everything, even when you're not looking for them. Our journey, though slow and filled with hesitation, had reached a point of undeniable clarity. The tentative steps we had taken toward one another had built a foundation, and now, for the first time, I felt like we were standing at the threshold of something meaningful. We weren't rushing into anything, there was no urgency, no pressure to make it more than what it was. But what it was had already begun to feel like something extraordinary. That evening, as we sat together once more in her cozy living room, the atmosphere felt different, warmer, softer, as if the room itself was holding us in a gentle embrace. The dim light from the lamp cast a golden glow on her features, making her look even more beautiful, even more real than I had ever seen her. There was no pretension, no guardedness. She had let me in, just as I had opened up to her, and in that vulnerability, there was a quiet strength that I couldn't ignore. We had spent the past several hours talking, sharing our thoughts on life, love, and everything in between. There was a peace in the way we communicated now, as if the weight of all the unspoken words had finally been lifted. The tension that had once hung between us had dissolved, replaced by something much deeper, something more profound. It wasn't just the chemistry anymore, it was the understanding, the emotional intimacy we had built together, brick by brick. I looked over at her, watching the way her hair fell softly around her shoulders, the way her eyes sparkled when she smiled. Her laughter filled the room again, light and genuine, and I couldn't help but feel that the connection between us was so much more than I had ever imagined. The walls that had once seemed insurmountable were now nothing more than faint memories. We had navigated our pasts, our fears, and our insecurities, and now, we stood together, side by side, ready to face whatever came next. At that moment, she caught me looking at her, her expression shifting from one of contentment to something more knowing. Her eyes softened, and she reached for my hand, her fingers brushing lightly against mine. The simple touch sent a wave of warmth through me, a reassurance that we were no longer just two people sharing a space, we were two people sharing something far deeper. Her voice was quiet but steady as she spoke, her words carrying a weight that matched the moment. I know we've taken it slow, and maybe we still don't have all the answers, but I don't want to miss out on whatever this is between us. She squeezed my hand gently, her eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. But there was none. There was only the certainty of what we had, and the promise of what we could build together. "I'm ready," she added softly. "I'm ready to see where this goes." The sincerity in her words left me breathless for a moment. It wasn't just a casual statement, it was a declaration, a willingness to embrace the unknown with me, to step forward together into a future we couldn't yet fully define, but one we were both eager to explore. There was no fear in her voice, only hope, and I realized that in that moment, I felt the same. I took a deep breath, my heart swelling with emotion, and I gently lifted her hand to my lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. It was a simple gesture, but it carried everything I felt in my chest, the gratitude, the admiration, the desire to protect and cherish what we had just begun to uncover. "I don't have all the answers either," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "But I know this, I don't want to walk this path without you." Her smile was all I needed in that moment, a reflection of everything we had shared and everything we had yet to discover. It was a promise, a quiet assurance that whatever came next, we would face it together. The future was no longer uncertain, it was filled with possibility, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to step forward into it. We didn't need grand declarations or perfect plans. What we had, the bond we had forged through slow conversations, shared laughter, vulnerability, and understanding, was more than enough. As I sat there, holding her hand, I knew we had something real. Something worth nurturing. And as we leaned in closer, our foreheads gently touching, the moment felt like a new beginning. No longer was it just about hesitation or the unknown. It was about the quiet certainty that, together, we could build something beautiful, something lasting. The world outside might have been uncertain, but in that moment, all that mattered was the warmth between us. The beginning of something beautiful. And for the first time, I felt complete.